This is Storybook Radio.
The afternoon sun was hidden behind a thick veil of clouds, casting a dull light over the quiet neighborhood. Sarah Monroe pulled her old Honda Civic into the cracked driveway of a modest, abandoned house she was set to sell. The tires crunched over the loose gravel as she put the car in park and sighed, drumming her fingers on the steering wheel. It wasn't an ideal property. Peeling paint, an overgrown lawn, and an eerie silence that seemed to seep from the foundation itself. But in this game, she took what she could get. Real estate was a brutal field, and as a young agent trying to make a name for herself, she couldn't afford to be picky. She adjusted her blazer, her fingers brushing over a small hole near the sleeve. Another reminder of how hard she was grinding. Long days, countless showings, and deals that often fell through at the last minute. She stepped out of the car, her worn-out heels clicking against the uneven pavement. A gust of wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine, whispering through the trees that loomed over the street. The house stood silent, waiting. She checked her phone, no messages from the seller yet. Then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed movement. A sleek black sedan rolled smoothly into the driveway of the grand mansion next door. The car was pristine, the kind that whispered money without screaming it. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. Mid to late 30s, fit but not overly muscular, dressed in modest workout gear. He had a casual confidence about him, the kind of presence that suggested he was used to being in control. He caught her looking and waved. Sarah hesitated before offering a polite nod in return. The man strolled toward the mansion's entrance, moving with an ease that didn't quite match the neighborhood's usual stiff professionalism. Was he the owner? Someone wealthy enough to afford such a house, but unbothered by the usual status symbols? She didn't have time to dwell on it. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A message flashed on the screen. Client, reschedule. Something came up. Sarah exhaled sharply, annoyance curling in her chest. Another wasted afternoon. She typed out a quick response, forcing herself to stay professional, though a string of unprofessional thoughts ran through her mind. Bad news? She looked up. The man was still outside, this time holding a leash. A large, sleek Doberman sat patiently by his feet, its ears perked as if listening to their conversation. My client just bailed on me, she admitted, unable to hide her frustration. Sorry to hear that. He glanced at her blazer, eyes narrowing slightly before flicking down to her shoes. Looks like you've been putting in the work. Sarah followed his gaze, suddenly self-conscious of the scuff marks on her heels. Yeah, well, I'm new to the game, she said, shrugging. He nodded thoughtfully. And single? If you don't mind me asking. She blinked at the sudden shift in the conversation. I have a partner, she replied, her voice carrying a note of exasperation. He's trying to break into the business as a broker. First big break hasn't come yet, though. The man smirked as if he had expected that answer. The dog pulled slightly at the leash, but he kept a firm grip, barely glancing down. Well, he said, tilting his head, maybe I have something that could help with that. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Help with what? Your partner's big break. He gestured toward the sidewalk. Walk with me. I'll tell you a little secret. A flicker of caution sparked in Sarah's mind, but curiosity outweighed it. There was something about the way he spoke, calm, measured, yet carrying an undertone of significance. She glanced at the mansion behind him, then at the house she was supposed to sell, now irrelevant for the day. Screw it, she nodded. All right, let's walk. As they started down the quiet street, she glanced at him again. So, what do you do? Besides, walking dogs? His lips curved into a smirk, as if he had been waiting for the question. I've been doing this since I was 16, he said. Only got a $3 raise since. Sarah let out a soft chuckle. Sounds like a terrible career move. He tilted his head. Or the best one I ever made. She frowned slightly. Something about the way he said it, casual yet firm, made her uneasy. How so? The man stopped walking for a moment, looking up at the sky as if considering his answer. Then he turned to her. I'm retired, he said simply. Sarah's footsteps faltered. Retired? You can't be older than 35. 37, he corrected. And yes, retired. She stared at him, trying to gauge if he was joking. He didn't look like a man who had hit the lottery. He had no flashy jewelry, no expensive watch, no air of inherited wealth. And yet, something about him was different, settled. As if he had unlocked a piece of life the rest of the world was still struggling to find. And yet, he continued, starting to walk again, I still work. Sarah caught up, feeling her pulse quicken. Why? He looked at her, his eyes sharp yet unreadable. Because I want to. Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. She let the silence stretch between them, her mind racing. He was an enigma, and she hated not having him figured out. Finally, she asked, How did you do it? Retire so young? His smirk widened. I didn't do anything. They did it for me. Sarah's stomach tightened. Who's they? Before he answered, the Doberman suddenly snapped forward, tugging at the leash. The man pulled back effortlessly, keeping the dog in check. But, in that brief moment, she swore she saw something in his eyes, an amusement that ran deeper than their conversation. Let me cue you in on something, he said. The saddest part about work isn't the work itself. It's being forced to do it. When you fail to meet quotas, when you miss too many days, when you're at the mercy of the system. Sarah exhaled. Your pockets suffer. Yes. His gaze lingered on her for a beat too long. But they don't have to. She didn't like how intrigued she was. They approached the top of a small hill in the neighborhood, the quiet hum of the town stretching below them. The air felt different here, charged with something she couldn't name. Let me tell you a story, he said, one about cards. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a weathered wallet, flipping it open to reveal a small deck of playing cards tucked neatly inside. With practiced ease, he slid out 6 cards and fanned them between his fingers. Sarah eyed them curiously. A king of hearts, a king of diamonds, a king of spades, and a king of clubs. Then 2 jokers. She raised an eyebrow. What, are you a magician? He smirked. In a way. He held up the cards one by one. The hearts, healthcare industries, the diamonds, mining industries, the spades, agriculture and farming, and the clubs, societies. Sarah frowned. And the jokers? His smile deepened. Politics and religion. She stared at him, feeling an unsettling weight settle in her chest. What does this have to do with my partner? She asked. The man slipped the cards back into his wallet and handed her a small, folded slip of paper. There's a diner, he said, up in the mountains. Take him there, give them the password, and then you'll see for yourself. Sarah took the paper, her fingers brushing against his for half a second. He felt cold. She swallowed. And then the wind picked up again, carrying whispers through the trees. Sarah sat in her car after parting ways with the mysterious man, the small slip of paper burning a hole in her palm. She unfolded it carefully, expecting to see something dramatic. Coordinates, an address scrawled hastily in cryptic handwriting. But it was just a diner name written in neat, almost mechanical print. The Hollow Rock Diner. Passcode, Red Moon. A chill ran down her spine. The sun had begun to set by the time she pulled into her driveway, her partner, James, already waiting inside their cramped apartment. He was hunched over his laptop at their wobbly kitchen table, frowning at a spreadsheet filled with numbers. Sarah knew that look. Another one fell through? She asked, dropping her bag onto the couch. James sighed, rubbing his temples. Yeah, another client who suddenly changed their mind. He glanced up at her. What about you? How'd the showing go? She hesitated. Then, instead of answering, she slid into the chair across from him and placed the folded paper on the table. James arched an eyebrow. What's this? She exhaled. A lead. He picked up the note, reading it with a frown. The Hollow Rock Diner? In the mountains, she confirmed. Someone told me we need to go there. Said there's something important happening. James gave her a wary look. Someone? Who? She licked her lips, searching for the right words. The dog walker from next door. James let out a dry laugh. We're getting financial advice from a dog walker now? Sarah leaned in, lowering her voice. He's not just a dog walker, James. He's different. He told me he's retired, 37, and he gave me this whole breakdown about how the world works. James crossed his arms, skeptical. And let me guess, He wants us to meet some secret society up in the mountains? She hesitated, then nodded. James scoffed. Sarah, come on. This sounds like something out of a bad conspiracy documentary. Sarah took his hands in hers, squeezing gently. Look, I know how it sounds, but what if it's real? What if this is our chance? You've been killing yourself, trying to get a foothold in this business. What if this is the opportunity we've been waiting for? James studied her for a long moment. Then finally he sighed. Fine, we'll go. But if we show up and this place is just some run-down diner, you owe me dinner. Sarah smiled, relief washing over her. Deal. The next evening, they drove up the winding roads leading into the mountains. The deeper they went, the more isolated the landscape became. Towering trees pressed in on both sides, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. James gripped the steering wheel tighter. I don't like this, he muttered. Feels like we're driving into the middle of nowhere. Sarah kept her eyes on the road, her heart thudding in her chest. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the world in eerie twilight. A fog rolled in, swirling between the trees like ghostly tendrils. Then, out of the mist, the diner appeared. The Hollow Rock Diner sat alone at the edge of a clearing, its neon sign flickering weakly against the darkness. There were only 3 cars in the parking lot. Old, unremarkable sedans that looked as though they had been parked there for years. James cut the engine and glanced at Sarah. Last chance to turn around. She exhaled, pushing the fear down. We're already here. Let's see what this is about. The moment they stepped through the door, a heavy silence settled over them. The place was nearly empty. Only a few customers hunched over their meals, barely acknowledging their presence. The air smelled of coffee and something slightly metallic, though Sarah couldn't place it. A waitress approached, her expression unreadable. She wore a faded uniform, her name tag blank. Table for 2? She asked flatly. Sarah shook her head. We were told to ask for the Red Moon. The waitress's eyes flickered with something. Recognition, maybe a hint of suspicion. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the back of the diner. Sarah and James exchanged a look. Are we really doing this? James whispered. Sarah swallowed. We've come this far. The waitress returned, gesturing for them to follow. She led them through a door marked Employees Only and down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. At the end of the hall was another door. She unlocked it, stepping aside. Through here, she said. Sarah hesitated. What's inside? The waitress didn't answer. James shot Sarah a look that said, This is a bad idea, but she ignored it and stepped through the door. What she saw on the other side stole the breath from her lungs. A long underground tunnel stretched before them, carved directly into the mountain. Dim lights lined the walls, casting a sickly yellow glow. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and something older, something ancient. James let out a low whistle. What the hell is this? Sarah didn't answer. She could hear something faint ahead, voices murmuring. They walked for what felt like miles, the tunnel narrowing at points, twisting and turning. The further they went, the stronger the whispers became. Then, up ahead, a soft glow appeared. As they stepped into the light, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. And what they saw inside made their blood run cold. The chamber was massive, larger than any banquet hall Sarah had ever seen. Dozens of round tables were arranged in neat rows, each covered in pristine white cloth. At the front of the room was a raised stage, a long banner draped behind it, displaying a symbol she didn't recognize. The room was filled with people, all dressed in sharp yet understated suits, their conversations hushed. Some stood near an elegant bar, sipping expensive-looking liquor. Others sat at the tables, poring over documents and whispering to one another. Sarah's breath caught when she recognized one of them, the owner of the mansion. He stood near the stage, his Doberman at his side. She turned to James, panic flashing in her eyes. That's... I know, James whispered, his grip tightening on her arm. Where's the dog walker? Sarah scanned the room. The man who had given her the lead was nowhere to be seen. Then a man stepped onto the stage, the king of clubs. His suit bore the emblem of a club symbol, embroidered in silver across his chest. He smiled, a politician's smile, as he addressed the room. We have our selections, he announced. For those of you who are new here, welcome. You are about to learn the truth. The crowd murmured, intrigued. The New York Giants will win the Super Bowl in 2026, he continued. Make your bets accordingly. Sarah felt her stomach twist. He then detailed the next Oscars winners, the stock market shifts, and even upcoming political conflicts. The Kings controlled everything. James's grip on her arm tightened. Sarah, he whispered, we need to go. She nodded, heart hammering. But before they could move, the King of Hearts stepped forward. And now, he said, let's talk about the next pandemic. Sarah felt her entire body go cold. She had heard enough. Grabbing James's hand, she turned toward the exit. And that was when she heard it. A voice, certain and familiar. Her blood froze. She turned slowly, looking for the dog walker, and in that moment, she swore. She heard someone call her name. The tunnel seemed longer on the way back. The damp walls, carved from the mountain itself, reflected the flickering glow of the overhead lights, casting elongated shadows that slithered along the path as Sarah and James hurried forward. Their footsteps echoed off the stone, their breaths sharp and uneven. Neither of them spoke for the first mile. Sarah's mind raced. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She kept replaying everything she had just seen. The King of Clubs, the King of Hearts, the little joker standing at the podium, orchestrating events that hadn't happened yet but soon would. Wars, elections, pandemics. Even the winner of the next Super Bowl. It was too much. James suddenly grabbed her arm, stopping her. His face was pale under the dim light, his pupils blown wide with fear. Sarah, what the hell was that? His voice was tight, almost strangled. She shook her head, her stomach nodding. I don't know. You do know. His grip tightened. They were planning things, Sarah. Not just guessing outcomes. They were controlling them. She yanked her arm away, rubbing at the skin where his fingers had dug in. I know, James. I was there too. Then what do we do? His voice cracked slightly. Sarah hesitated. That was the real question, wasn't it? What could they do? If they told anyone, they'd be labeled as conspiracy theorists, dismissed as crazy. No one would believe them. And even if they did, what then? She swallowed hard, forcing her thoughts into order. We don't tell anyone. James blinked, taken aback. Are you serious? Yes. She started walking again. Think about it, James. These people have power, real power. If they know we saw them, they do know we saw them, he interrupted, his voice laced with panic. That dog, Sarah. The mansion owner was there with his dog. And you know who wasn't there? Sarah's breath hitched, the dog walker, nor his assistant. Her mind reeled. He had sent her here, given her the invitation, hinted at what she would find. But he wasn't inside the mountain. James continued. And why the hell did we hear that dog barking when we were leaving? Sarah shivered. Coincidence. James exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. They reached the exit of the tunnel, emerging into the cold night air. The diner was still as they had left it, empty, its neon sign flickering weakly. Their car sat alone in the parking lot. James hesitated, scanning the lot. 16 people left that building before we went in. Sarah nodded. And 3 cars were outside. They had both done the math. Those numbers didn't add up. Let's just go, she whispered, gripping his hand. James didn't argue. They got into the car, locked the doors, and peeled out of the parking lot. But as they drove away, Sarah felt it again. The weight of unseen eyes, watching. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Sarah kept waiting for something to happen, for someone to show up at their apartment, for an anonymous letter to arrive, for a black car to follow them. Nothing did, at least not right away. Instead, something worse happened. They started winning. James made an investment based on what they heard that night, just a small one, testing the waters. The returns were staggering. The pharmaceutical stocks that the King of Hearts had mentioned skyrocketed exactly on schedule. Then came the sports bets. The Super Bowl, just as predicted, ended with the New York Giants on top. James was ecstatic. He pushed for more investments, more bets, more risks. Sarah, on the other hand, felt something gnawing at her. It was all too easy. The world moved like clockwork. Every decision had been made in advance, every event predetermined by the men inside that mountain. The feeling was suffocating. And then, On a cold morning, she returned to the mansion. Her new car purred as she pulled into the driveway. She was dressed in a tailored suit, brand new, not a single scuff on her shoes, not a single tear in her blazer. Money had come quickly, too quickly. She waited outside, staring at the familiar front door, and then it opened. The dog walker stepped out, leash in hand, the same Doberman trotting obediently by his side. His smile was as unreadable as ever. "You're back," he said, as if he had been expecting her. Sarah studied him carefully. He looked exactly the same, unbothered, almost smug. "You knew what we would find," she said. He nodded. "Of course." She exhaled. "And the assistant? I didn't see her at the gathering." The dog walker smirked. "Oh, she was there." Sarah frowned. "Where?" He nodded toward the Doberman at his side. Sarah's pulse slowed. "What?" The man squatted slightly, scratching behind the dog's ears. "They never suspect the quiet ones, the ones who blend in, the ones no one questions." He stood, tilting his head at her. "Kinda like me." Sarah's throat was dry. She took a step back. "What are you saying?" Then the dog turned its head toward her, and it spoke. "I saw you there." Sarah's blood ran cold. The voice was smooth, calm, almost human. Her breath hitched as she stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the curb. Her entire body felt wrong, her mind refusing to process what had just happened. She looked back at the dog walker, searching for some explanation, some rationality, some logic, but he just smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You should be careful, Sarah," he said, his voice even. "You've seen too much." Sarah's hands trembled. Then, without another word, she turned and bolted toward her car. She didn't look back, didn't wait to see what else the dog might say. She slammed the door, started the engine, and sped away from the mansion, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. But even as she put miles between herself and that house, she could still hear it, that voice, that single impossible sentence. "I saw you there." Sarah didn't tell James about what happened. She couldn't. Not because he wouldn't believe her, but because she didn't want to hear herself say it out loud. Instead, she kept moving, kept pretending that everything was normal. But sometimes, late at night, when she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she would hear it. A whisper, not from James, not from outside, from inside her own mind. A whisper of a voice she would never forget. And in the distance, beyond the city, beyond the forests, the mountains stood silently, watching, waiting, and listening.